Welcome back, everyone, to the Madness and Grace podcast. Today, it's just me and Matt. We actually just released a kind of a two-parter with our Gateway to Hope program about building a mental health ministry in your church. And we're kind of back to the original recipe today with just me and Matt talking about some of the trending topics going on. How's it going, Matt? How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Emily?
I'm good. I'm eager to talk about our topic today. Everyone listening has probably already seen the title about burnout. Like, what does it mean to be burnt out? Not only just in, our career, but in our family, in our relationships. And just to give like a brief, definition of burnout, just kind of the state of physical and mental exhaustion caused by stress or overworking yourself. And Matt, I really wanted to talk about this because I've just observed, and we talked about this a little bit too in our episode about anxiety, about how, people these days are just more anxious than they used to be. And I feel like burnout, people are more, you can't see me because we're not recording this in video, but I'm putting air quotes up. They're more burnt out easily than they were before. And I just wonder why that is. And yeah, just some of the things I've seen that we talked about before we started recording is that, I feel like people my age, they kind of cycle through jobs a little bit quicker. People used to stay at the same company for years on end. Now it's 2-3 years and people are burnt out and they're ready to move on, to something else. But then they quickly find out they're burnt out at that job too. So it's just kind of this never ending cycle. And the issue never really gets addressed. It's just kind of, they think change of scenery will help the burnout. So what's your opinion on that? That's just kind of what I've seen.
Yeah, I think that, much like with our society in general, we have a tendency to use these psychological terms very well. It's not really a psychological term, but it is and it isn't. We use them very cheaply, and I think they're kind of undefined a lot of times when people use them. So you're right. People say, "Oh, I'm so burned out," when really what they mean is they're just stressed. Mm-hmm. And burnout, as you said, I mean, that is that tends to be described as emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion, caused by excessive and prolonged stress. So, what happens, burnout doesn't happen overnight and doesn't happen in a short period of time. You get a heightened level of stress and anxiety for whatever reason. A lot of times we associate burnout just with our jobs, but it can be burned out just kind of in your life.
Yeah.
And so you have this heightened anxiety or stress. And then when that's not alleviated or you don't deal with that over time, that causes what we typically call burnout. I think, what you're seeing with, people kind of throwing that out is that, when things get tough, when things get stressful, they miss that kind of initial kind of honeymoon period of the first, when you start your job or you start a relationship or whatever. And then, I just don't, I think we've got two things going on in our society right now. Number one, we have extreme anxiety like we've never seen before. And that was already on the rise long before the pandemic came along. The pandemic just was an accelerator for that. And I also think with younger individuals, we really don't teach people how to be resilient anymore. We don't teach them how to push through stressful situations. We don't teach them how to deal with stress. It's not just that you got to kind of white knuckle it through stress. We don't teach people how to deal with stress. Life is stressful. Jobs are stressful. Relationships can be stressful. That's just life.
Yeah.
But how do you deal with your stress? And that's really part of this conversation we'll have about burnout is, anybody can get burned out.
Yeah.
Regardless of what your job is. You can have the easiest job in the world and you can get burned out. But because it's not just your job, it's accumulation of stress from your life and what's going on and your inability to deal with that. And so how do you deal with that? Are you taking care of yourself on a daily basis? Are you dealing with your stress in a healthy way? Those are the things that are important. I mean, you could literally have the most stressful job in the world and hate it and never get burned out if you deal with your stress in an effective way.
Yeah, totally. What are some signs and symptoms that someone should be looking for? I think for me personally, I've talked about it on the podcast before. I suffer from anxiety and it's hard for me to differentiate, am I just tired? Am I burnt out? Am I anxious? What kind of signs and symptoms would kind of point to you being, burnt out?
Well, first I'll say, just kind of repeat what I just said.
Yeah.
The thing is, before I give the symptoms,
Yeah.
burnout doesn't happen overnight. So
Yeah.
you're gonna be stressed for a while.
Yeah.
And then signs of burnout, I mean, there's physical, there's emotional, and there's behavioral signs. So on the physical side, you're going to have, a lot of physical symptoms like headaches, a lot of stomach problems. We will, you see a lot of people that say that people will say that they have a lot of gastrointestinal issues. They're nauseous, or they're having trouble, going to the bathroom, things like that. Fatigue. So, on the boss side of this, when you have employees that you supervise, stuff like that, you're going to see people start to miss work a lot. Because they're always sick, and they're not just faking it. Now, you'll also see, personally, you'll find you go to the doctor because you're not feeling well, but the doctor never finds anything wrong with you. So, a lot of changes in appetite. You're eating too much or too little. You can't sleep, or you sleep too much. On the emotional side, it's really for burnout. Burnout is more than stress. I mean, stress is you're down. Burnout is you're helpless. You're lost. You're so exhausted you can't go on, kind of thing. You're irritable. You have a lot of cynicism. Nothing is ever going to be any better. Real sense of failure and self-doubt. Those kind of things begin, which really kind of separates it from this idea of just being stressed, not motivated. Like if you're your peers or the staff you work with, they now become almost your enemies because they're the ones causing you problems. And then on the behavioral side, a lot of anger outburst, a lot of procrastination, a lot of avoidance. Like you'll do anything not to go to work. You wake up and you have a hangnail, and so I'm not going to work. I'm sick today. I'm gonna take a PTO. You might start using substances to try, drinking more to try to deal with the stress. And again, I think the tendency is people will put that all on their job. Like the job is the problem. And so then, as you said, people will jump ship like, oh, I just got to change jobs and then that'll fix everything. And the reality is it's not the job. The reality is it's your inability or you ignoring the fact that stress has been building up over time. I mean, a job may contribute to that, but you're not dealing with it in a healthy way. And so, I mean, people that have no job, people that, stay-at-home moms that, I guess obviously their job is to take care of their family, which gets very stressful job. But people they don't have a boss yelling at them all day. People that are self-employed and are doing well, they can get burned out. So it's not always, we will have a tendency to focus on, well, it's my relationship or it's my job or whatever. If I just change that, and that's just not it. I mean, really, in some sense, that's kind of like, analogy I give a lot of times is somebody they want to lose weight, and because their clothes aren't fitting right, and so what they do is, well, I'll just get bigger clothes. And so, and now I feel better. Okay, well, that's great. But if the goal was to lose weight, well, then you still have the same issue. So that, it's the same thing. Oh, well, I'm stressed out on my job, so I'm going to change jobs. Well, you'll still be stressed out on the next job.
Yeah. All of the signs and symptoms you just described, they kind of sound strikingly similar to someone who might have depression or severe anxiety. And I guess my question would be, how does one differentiate whether, okay, do I have a mental illness or am I just overworked and burnt out? And, I imagine that the way to manage all of those symptoms is very similar to how you would manage, depression or anxiety. So how would someone kind of differentiate? Am I burnt out or, are there other underlying issues here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the reality is they certainly all overlap. So you can easily have an anxiety condition or stress related problem that really did meet criteria for a mental health issue or illness, and be burned out, or you can be burned out and not have that. So what I would say is burnout is certainly a mental health issue. I would put it in that context. Normally, when somebody is burned out, you'll hear them say things like, I'm in survival mode, or I'm exhausted, or I'm done. I can't give anymore. And that's kind of the description, as opposed to when people are anxious, it's more of a fear-based kind of, they have an anxiety disorder, it's more of a fear-driven kind of thing, or they talk about being overwhelmed. It's more of a, I'm overwhelmed, or I'm fearful of these types of things. I'm fearful. So there's that real exhaustion sense of with related to burnout. That's not to say that there couldn't be an anxiety problem in there or a stress related issue, because that's where burnout starts. Burnout doesn't start with burnout. That's just a term we use when you kind of get to the end. Burnout starts with stress and or anxiety. So if you're a person who struggles with anxiety and you don't manage your anxiety, well, then obviously you're more prone to anxiety. And when stress from the environment comes in, your anxiety will go up. And then now you're getting moved, closer and closer to what we would call burnout. Right. So it's kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other type of thing. So it's all about managing your stress and your anxiety level. And if you need therapeutic intervention or medication for that, well, then that's just part of it. Most people don't need that. But that's not to minimize those who do need that. Some people do need that. And so, it's a good thing that it's there. But I also would say most people do nothing to try to manage their stress.
Yeah.
And that's why they either don't try to manage it, or they have no idea how to manage it.
Yeah, no idea how to manage it, and managing it with things that they don't know, but causing them more stress. So we talked about doom scrolling on your phone. They think, I'm just going to unwind and get on my phone for a couple hours, when in reality it's probably just adding to
absolutely
everything going on. Yeah.
Well, I think doctors, physicians have done a disservice to clients over the years, because you'll go to a doctor, particularly someone my age, I'm 57. And a doctor will say to you, well, I see that you're starting to have maybe some heart issues. You need to remove stress from your life, or reduce stress in your life. I mean, the way you reduce stress in your life is you die. Okay. And so the life is stressful. I mean, we go through, look what we've been through in the last few years. And so it is stressful to be a human being on the globe. And, honestly, the fact that we here in the United States complain about stress is laughable compared to what some people have to deal with every day. And so, but that's not to say we don't have stress, and we certainly do. But if you do nothing to deal with what the doctor should say is you need to learn to manage your stress.
Yeah.
Or mitigate your stress, or control your stress, or reduce your stress, not to remove it from your life, because that's not possible. So, you literally, if you lived on a desert island alone, you will have stress, because you have to find food and water, and that's but how do you deal with the stress? That's what's important.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, this is kind of it's a mental health podcast, but also a faith-based podcast. And I think one of the ways someone can manage stress, manage burnout is, faith can play a really big role in that. Just having a sense of purpose, guidance, community. I feel like we touch on that in every episode, but I just wanted to point out that it can play a big role in, coping with burnout. And I'm doing this for a purpose. I'm tired, and I'm stressed and I'm anxious, but I have a higher calling. And I just think that's important to think about.
Absolutely. When you look at, there's a ton of research behind that. When you ask clients that have heightened levels of stress, like because they have terminal illnesses or cancer or things like that, when you ask them, how is it that they deal with their stress on a daily basis in relationship to, their prognosis? Prayer is always number one. It's always number one. That's a real go-to for a lot of people, and it's very effective. And as you said, being involved in a faith community where you have others that can kind of help carry your burden and support you, finding that kind of a faith community. So, right there, you've already mentioned a couple of, people don't think about it that way, but a couple of ways that you could deal with your stress. One is that you can grow your spiritual life. You can pray more. You can study the Bible more. You can, those types of things. Be involved in activities at your church or your congregation more. Another is to be involved in a fellowship where you have other people around you where you can talk to them about your problems and they'll listen, or they'll pray for you, or they'll be present with you, or they'll help you with those types of issues. So, I mean, right there, you've already done a couple of things that can help deal with stress. But again, most people, they don't think about it that way. And so, but that's a tremendous stress reliever. And then just the connecting to something larger than yourself, being
Right.
connected to God, where, you have some sense that you're not in control, that someone else is in control, and that God has your best intentions
Yeah.
in mind, that he is good, that he cares for you. I mean, again, that's been demonstrated to be a tremendous stress reliever.
And I think some people might think that the idea of getting involved in a faith community is stressful. Another thing to add to my plate, or another thing,
Right.
but I will just say from experience, more times than not, you don't have to jump in and become the head pastor. You can start small and, join a small group and, tailor it to what you can handle. You don't have to dive in so deep. I feel like a lot of people think that there's this pressure that if I join a church, I'm going to have to dedicate all
Right.
this time, but you can really tailor it to what you need.
Absolutely. And that's just like the number one stress reliever, which is exercise.
Yeah.
If you don't have to just, I mean, you don't have to run out and join a gym.
Yeah.
You don't have to go spend a fortune on weights for your garage or something.
Hmm.
Just, tell yourself, okay, I've got to do something. So
Hmm.
I'm going to walk 20 minutes in my neighborhood. I'm
Hmm.
going to start out doing it one day a week,
Hmm.
because now you're doing something more than you were doing. And so,
Totally.
that's the way to think about it. A lot of times we're it's almost like a crisis kind of response, because you're in such bad shape from a burnout perspective, as we've been talking about. You think you got to do it all at one time, and if it isn't all gone by next Thursday, then there's a problem.
Yeah.
You didn't get into this overnight, and you're not going to get out of it overnight.
Right.
And so just doing something. So like you said, I mean, maybe, if you're not involved with a faith community, but you think that might be helpful, start watching one on Sunday morning for a
Yeah.
month. I
Hmm.
mean, go buy yourself a Bible. I mean, there's just, it's small
Yeah.
steps, because now it's all about self-care. And so you just a little bit at a time, and then what you find useful, valuable, helpful, well, then you do more of that, and you'll want to do more of that. And
Yeah.
so if you just try to jump in, into the deep end, all
Mhm.
out, that doesn't go very well.
Yeah, it's too daunting. Nothing has to be so
It is
extreme.
more stressful, as you said. It becomes one more thing,
Yeah,
one more
yeah,
thing.
totally. Well, thank you so much, Matt. We got to talk about this today. We have a ton of resources here at Hope and Healing Center that we deal with a whole spectrum of things, but our mental health gateway app is a great place to start to just kind of learn a little bit more about something you might be dealing with. And then we just have really practical stuff, breathing techniques, just simple things that you can kind of be guided through. So I'll leave all of that in the show notes as usual. Our Hope line as well is a really good place to go if you need to talk to
Absolutely.
somebody, feeling burnt out, you feel like I don't want to burden this with anyone I know and I just need to talk to someone. That's why our Hope line is here. So I'll leave that phone number in our description as well. And yeah, thanks so much, Matt.
Thank you.